I have 6 p.m. Do we have everyone here?
Yes, Mayor, whenever you're ready.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I would like to call to order this special meeting of the Glendora City Council to discuss the housing element. Tonight's public meeting will be conducted utilizing Zoom video communications. This allows the city to conduct essential business and comply with Public Health Administration recommendations to protect the public and city employees and to practice social distancing and limit exposure by not allowing in-person public meeting. To ensure and allow the public to be able to participate in our meeting, public comments can be submitted as live comments during our Zoom meeting and also via email at publiccomments@cityofglendora.org. Madam Deputy City Clerk, will you please conduct the roll call?
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, I would like to conduct an oral roll call and request that each council member respond with present when their name is called. Councilmember Alawas?
Present.
Councilmember Thompson?
Present.
Councilmember Friedendahl?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Boyer?
Present.
And Mayor Davis. Thank you. All are present. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Tonight we have one item on our agenda, and it is the consideration of options to create a housing sites inventory for compliance with the 6th cycle Regional Housing Needs Assessment, also known as RHNA, Strategic Plan, Item 1 ISED. So at this time, I'd like to invite Community Development Director Jeff Kugel to report. Mr. Kugel.
Madam Mayor, if I can interject, I think at this point we can call for comment, public comment.
Okay, I was going to call for that after Mr. Kugel's report.
Okay.
You should call for public comment for all items that are not on the agenda, if there are any.
Okay, so at this time, sorry, Mr. Kugel, we will open public comment for any items that are not on the agenda tonight. Do we have anyone that has sent in an email or requested to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, we've received no emails requesting public comment. And no requests via the Zoom meeting for public comment as well.
Okay, thank you. Then I will close this public comment and invite Mr. Kugel to make his presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and the rest of the City Council. If I could get the first slide up, thank you. So this item is a study session on the housing element, and in particular, the sites inventory. I'm going to give a presentation, essentially a very similar presentation that I gave to the Planning Commission a couple months ago when they held their first study session. And after that, I've asked Chair Kent of the Planning Commission also to say a few words about the Commission's recommendation. And in addition to myself, after the presentation, Veronica Tam from Veronica Tam and Associates, who's been retained by the city to help in preparing the update to the housing element and work through the state to get an approved housing element, is also on the line and available for questions. Next slide, please. So each city in California is required to demonstrate through its housing element that it can accommodate its total number of RHNA units, or Regional Housing Needs Assessment units. And as you know, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment are part of the allocation to every city in the state of California to in order to plan for its fair share of growth within the state. So this is an item that every city and county in California is has to work through. And right now, this is the SCAG region, which covers most of Southern California, which is working through the current cycle of the housing element, which is the 6th cycle. Housing elements are required to be updated either right now the period is 8 years. It has been as short as 5 or 6 at some time, and this has been a requirement of state law when it comes to cities and their general plan since the 1980s. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the Planning Commission has held actually several introductory and study sessions on the development of the housing element. The first was actually last November when we kicked off the housing element. And we actually started by, just introducing them to the process and what was required, especially for those who haven't been on the commission in previous cycles. We also started developing the core part of the process, which is the sites inventory, which is identifying sites within the city where it can accommodate its allocation of housing units. And the commission held 2 meetings on that particular issue, first on April 6th and then on May 4th. And staff had prepared 3 options, 3 alternatives for them to consider, and they recommended one of those options, and I'll be going through those tonight. So tonight, we're asking the council to review the Planning Commission's recommendation for a housing sites inventory. And then once that is done, the next step would be for Veronica Tam and Associates and the city to complete a draft housing element. And at that point, we can submit it to the state of California for its review. The state of California has, under the housing element law, 60 days to review the housing element and provide comment to the city, and the city then has to revise its housing element as requested by the state, and then present it to the council for final adoption prior to October 21st, I believe is the date. Next slide, please. So when I talked about RHNA and the Regional Housing Needs Assessment and the numbers that are allocated to the city, and these are numbers that the city has to plan for within the housing element cycle. So this table shows the allocation of units for the 5th cycle, which is the cycle that we're in, and then also for the 6th cycle, which is the cycle that will cover the period from 2021 to 2029. And you'll notice that on the very far left-hand column that there are a series of, it says very low, low, moderate, above moderate, and those are the income categories that cities are required to plan for. And while this is not a production requirement, it requires the city to show through its housing element that it could, in theory, accommodate those number of units in each of those categories within its land use plan and somewhere in the city. So that's the city's burden to demonstrate that, and we can get as creative as we want to and with that, how we do that. And so you can see there's a big difference in the terms of the total numbers in the 5th cycle versus the 6th cycle. And so you have 686 units allocated for our current cycle. And then for the next cycle, there's over 2,000, close to 3,000 units, in fact, that we have to show capacity for, sites for, and ways to encourage that development within the city should it come to us. And so this has been the most challenging cycle, I think, that anybody in the state has ever been involved with, just because of the numbers. And of course, the numbers are driven by the state. Identification of housing is a crisis that's statewide, as we know in Glendora. Rents, housing costs are comparatively or high in California. And so the state solution is to plan and build more housing as a way to increase supply to satisfy that demand. Next slide, please. One of the new laws that I think I need to mention, because it affects how we plan for those units in our upcoming cycle. There were a series of, I think it was about 14 or 15 laws at the very end of 2017 that were passed and signed by the governor at that time. And one of them is called the No Net Loss Law. And what it essentially says is that through our planning efforts, the city has to demonstrate that it can meet any unmet RHNA throughout the cycle. So as we move forward, if a site that was a housing site was changed to commercial, we would need to show that we still have capacity to meet the housing needs assessment or the remaining units somewhere in the city. It also means that when development comes to us, that especially in areas that are identified on a housing sites inventory, that we need to make sure those developments achieve near or at or approaching the maximum density that's allowed within that zone. And that is why one of the reasons in developing a housing sites inventory, we have that 2,276 unit number that we need to plan for, and the state strongly recommends, and we believe that they will really essentially require that when we submit it to them, is a buffer, a 15 to 30% buffer. This is important and critically important to meet the low income categories, because the low income categories require a certain density in a certain area to satisfy those requirements, and also in the market rate categories as well. So you'll see a buffer built into the options that we present. So let's get in and start talking about how we are approaching meeting our housing elements. So the next slide, please. Excuse me. So starting off the bat, the state allows you to get credit for a variety of things. One of them are a pattern of development of accessory dwelling units. As you all know, the state has passed a series of laws that make it easier for property owners, homeowners, and investors to build a second unit, and in some cases even a third unit on single family lots. So in essence, in the state, all single family lots can accommodate 2, and in some cases 3 units on a lot through an ADU or a junior ADU in addition to the house. And we've seen a pattern that we believe can justify 160 accessory dwelling units over the planning period of 2021 to 2029. So and that gives us credit in the low income category because it's understood by the state, or it meets their requirements to accommodate units in that category. So you see in this table, for example, we've shown potential ADUs over the period on the second to left column in the low income category. And in addition to that, we're able to count units that have been entitled or have been given permits but are not yet completed. And we have approximately 68 of those units. So that highlighted number in yellow, so when we think about the sites inventory and how we accommodate or try to meet that, we're now down to just over 2,000 units that we need to identify and plan for. Next slide, please. So the staff, in approaching this number, developed 3 options for the commission to look at, 3 ways in which to meet our Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. And all 3 options really build upon previous policies that the city has adopted through a growth strategy, which really counts on the majority of growth occurring along our major east-west corridors. So I'll call it the east-west corridor strategy, for lack of a better term. And those east-west corridors are the Route 66 corridor. Really pretty much most of the corridor can accommodate housing now, and the Arrow Highway corridor. And I won't go into the reasons behind those policies, but can answer questions about that when the time comes. So the sites inventory that was presented as part of the staff report, there's a map, there's sites showing all of the sites that we've identified, but we've found a few different ways to, with those sites, we cannot meet that 2,000 unit number that we've tried to identify. And so in that case, you have to look at rezoning properties to accommodate those levels of density or to accommodate units within the city. And so we focused on really 3 sub-districts within the Route 66 specific plan and the Arrow Highway specific plan, those east-west corridors, to, number 1, to restore some of the density that was removed when the specific plan was revised on Arrow Highway in 2017. And in one of the options, we've concluded that we would also have to increase the density in the Arrow Highway specific plan, which was adopted in 2018. So next slide, please. At this point, I'm going to go through it again. As I've said, in all 3 options I'll present, the sites inventory itself is the same, but I want to show and illustrate the 3 areas within the Route 66 corridor where the densities would be adjusted, increased in the 3 options that are presented. So this map here is then the purple shows a boundary of the town center mixed use sub-district of the Route 66 specific plan. And this district is the district that encompasses the Gold Line stop. It was planned to accommodate the highest density in the city. And the project that is really emblematic of that zoning, which was created in 2003, is the Avalon Bay Project at the corner of Glendora and Route 66. But this is our transit-oriented zone. So let's go to the next slide. Among the things that were done to the town center mixed use in the 2017 revise was that its boundaries were altered. It was shrunk down. So what remains of the town center mixed use from the pre-2017 specific plan is what's in purple. So you can see we eliminated all of the areas north of the railroad tracks and also some of the areas on the south side of Route 66. We've also found in our analysis that we will have to restore one of those areas on the south side to the TCMU in order to meet our RENA numbers. And that area that we would restore would be at the far bottom right corner. It says RSC, and it runs from Pasadena west to the alley. So that's a little commercial strip that would be brought back in under the 3 proposals that I'll go through. But in other words, all we're doing here is bumping up the density a little bit. Next slide, please. These are the sites that are part of the sites inventory that have been identified that are within the town center mixed use. The blue sites are sites that are already identified in the 5th cycle housing element. So those have not been redeveloped. And so they're being carried over into the 6th cycle. You're allowed to do that under state law. The green properties are properties that would be newly added to the sites inventory. And you'll notice that we purposely did not include the Albertsons Shopping Center. The idea being this is a mixed use zone. And from a planning perspective, staff's recommendation on identifying sites within this TCMU is that the Albertson Shopping Center could be remodeled, but we're hoping that the market will be strong enough and to support that it remain as a shopping center of some type of major commercial anchor near the Gold Line station, which may be an Albertsons. It could evolve over time, but when you create your sites inventory, you're basically telling the state and the world these are the sites that we want developed for housing. Even though there might be other properties where that could happen in theory, these are the primary sites that we want to see developed for housing. Next slide, please. The next district I'll talk about that would be altered in any of the 3 scenarios is the central Route 66 residential, and the project that was developed pre-2017 in this area are the Ellwood Apartments on the southwest corner of Ellwood and Route 66. It's only on the south side of the street, and it runs from Ellwood to Lamar Park on the south side, and densities would be adjusted in this location under the 3 options as well. Next slide. And this shows the sites, new and old, new being the 6th and 5th cycle sites. And those numbers, for those who are wondering what the numbers are, it doesn't mean the number of units or anything you could develop. We just had to, the way we numbered site 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is just a chronological numbering of the sites within the sites inventory. Next slide, please. The third area on Route 66 that would be adjusted with respect to density is called the Barranca Gateway subdistrict. This is another mixed use subdistrict in the Route 66 specific plan. And the primary or the main pre-2017 project in this subdistrict are the Forestdale Apartments on the northeast corner of Forestdale and Route 66. This runs from Barranca at the west to just before Grand. Actually, you can see the boundaries here on the east are the Sprouts Anchored Shopping Center to the south, and the Hat on the north side. Next slide, please. And these again are the sites identified within this subdistrict that would be part of the proposed sites inventory. Next slide. And lastly, I wanted to Arrow Highway, our most recently adopted specific plan along the east-west corridor of Arrow Highway, where we share a boundary to the south with both the city of Covina and the county of Los Angeles, but the north side of Arrow Highway is city of Glendora. Essentially, the way that specific plan is structured is that pretty much all the properties east of Glendora, all the way to Valley Center, allow housing or commercial on those properties. So at this moment, I'll explain what the density is there, but we're actually processing a couple of housing projects right now in this quarter. And actually we have one that was approved and they're starting to enter the construction plan check phase. And there've been a couple other projects as a result of the specific plan that are not the commercial projects, such as the Glendora Market and one or two others. Next slide. So to give you a comparison of the pre and post 2017 Route 66 specific plan, this chart shows at the top, you see pre-2017, and along the top, it lists those sub-districts I just went over. You can see that under the original Route 66 TCMU, the original pre-2017 specific plan allowed up to 55 dwelling units to the acre and 5 stories. And that was reduced down to 30 units to the acre and 3 stories in 2017. Similarly, both the CRR subdistrict and the Barranca Gateway or BG subdistrict were 45 units to the acre max, 4 stories, and they were both reduced, substantially as well. As you can see that in the bottom column, with also 30 or 20 units to the acre, respectively. Next slide. So now I'm going to get into going through, now that you have that background, I was hoping that it'll make the explanation of each of the options a little bit easier. So thank you for bearing with me on that. So let's go right into the first alternative. So option A. So option A and B and C, in some sense, all restore or partially restore some of the pre-2017 density in the Route 66 specific plan. Again, there's no changes to the map or sites. It's just we just adjusted densities based on the sites we identified. Option A shows that what we've done is this is a full restoration of the density that was allowed in the town center mixed use, which is just that purple area that I started with around the Gold Line station, back to 55 units to the acre. To give you, and then in the CRR bumps it up to 40. So where the in that subdistrict and the Barranca Gateway gets bumped up from 2 stories to 3 stories and 30 units to the acre. And by doing this, next slide. By doing this, we can achieve the RHNA requirement. We have more than enough units in the low income category. In the low income category, again, being defined as having a minimum size of, I believe it's at least half an acre and density over 30 units to at least 30 units to the acre. We also have a sufficient buffer. We need, in this scenario, we need about a 200 unit buffer. And so under option A, it works. It's consistent with the Route 66 specific plan. It just involves making some adjustments to the density in some of the areas. Next slide. Option B, and this is the option that the Planning Commission selected after a couple of meetings of deliberation on this. The Planning Commission, the option B, is sort of the in-between option of the 3 options. And on the TCMU, it doesn't fully restore the density to the pre-2017 density, but it does bump it up from 30 units to the acre to 45 units to the acre and 4 stories. Does the same thing in the CRR zone, if you can read along the bottom. And it also does the same thing, or it bumps it up to 35 units to the acre and 3 stories in the Barranca Gateway. And it leaves Arrow Highway alone. So both options A and B don't touch Arrow Highway. Next slide. And again, when we crunch the numbers, we come up with a meeting our RENA requirements. This only, option B, like option A, only touches Route 66 with respect to any zoning changes. We're able to submit something to the state that we're pretty confident that they will, approve, hopefully, through that process, at least make our best effort. And we have a buffer. It'd be nice to have a few more units, closer to 200, but this gets pretty close to what we would need. Next slide. So this is option C. Option C is the sort of the lower density option. So, I mentioned that, the city's sort of planning strategy for the past couple decades has been to utilize the major east-west corridors, which this plan still primarily does. However, as I'll explain, there might need to be some additional sites added, not necessarily additional rezoning, but additional sites added to the sites inventory to get this option to work. And so let me just kind of explain what that is. So as you can see, looking at, again, on each of these slides, I've shown what the pre-2017 density was on Route 66, the current density, and you'll see at the bottom, the only sub-district that this option would affect is the Barranca Gateway, and it would bump it up from its current 2-story 20 units to the acre up to 3 stories 30 units to the acre. Likewise, because we don't achieve enough units on the sites identified by making those 3 adjustments, or just touching those 3 sub-districts and leaving really the 2 big one, or the TCMU alone, we have to also increase the density on Arrow Highway from 2 to 3 stories, depending on the area, 25 units to the acre, up to 3 stories, 30 units to the acre. So it would require some more work, particularly on Arrow Highway, where on Route 66, one of the good things about increasing the zoning on Route 66 is that we wouldn't be exceeding any density that was previously adopted by the council. In other words, we'd still be below the densities that were approved under the original 2003 or pre-2017 Route 66 specific plan. Next slide. So the one issue with option C is, as I alluded to before, is that relying on at least our east-west corridor strategy, we can, and the rezoning of Arrow Highway, we can achieve the RENA number, but we don't have enough of a buffer. And we think we need about 150 more units. So what that would mean is, and I think I haven't listed them, but trying to identify sites. We think there are other sites that we could put in the sites inventory. They're not on, for the most part, well, they're not on any of the east-west corridors, because one of the things that we didn't want to do was we wanted to limit any rezoning we had to do. So we've looked for other sites around the community in existing residential neighborhoods that are undeveloped or not fully developed to their full capacity, like single family homes in multiple family areas or vacant lots in single family areas. There's one school site that has been talked about by that district as a potential surplus site. Those types of things that we'd cobble together to achieve a little bit better of a buffer under option C. Next slide. So what I want to do is I know for a lot of people when you're talking about what does 20 units to the acre look like? What is 30 and 40 and 50? So I wanted to at least just go through some examples of what, these are all examples of projects that have been built in Glendora, and so everybody should be pretty familiar with them. So next slide. So this is the Avalon Bay project that everybody knows in the corner of Glendora and Route 66. This is an example of a 4-story, 50 to 55 unit to the acre development. It's 4 stories. It's got a parking structure that goes above the roof line in the back of the building, but it's 4 stories. It's about 52, 53 units to the acre. So under option A, this type of project would be allowed. And actually, it's the only option that would allow a project of this density. Option B only allows up to 45 units to the acre. And option C, of course, is 30. Next slide. This is the Ellwood Apartments. This is a 3-story. It's about a 30, it's actually a little over, I think it might be 36 units to the acre, but this is 3-story. It has a little bit bigger setback at 15 feet, which we did change in 2017. So all the setbacks have been increased. But this is a podium style project where you have semi-subterranean parking, and it's about 35 units to the acre. Next slide. These are the Forestdale Apartments. This is a 3-story with the tallest portion, I believe, accommodates an elevator, but another example of 30 to 35 unit to the acre. Product types, this product is surface park. There's no parking structure, so the parking is in the back, but everybody's familiar with this project as well. Next slide. This is the sort of the 3-story townhome, 15 to 20, which this type of unit these are for sale condominiums. What I've shown you so far are all apartments or flats. This is a condominium project, which is very popular to build in the region. Many of the projects that have come to Glendora are this product type. And this particular one is on the high end of what this product type produces. It's about 22 units to the acre. So you drive in, you've got tuck under garages. It's got a little bit of mixed use on the front, but it's 3 stories. It's roughly 35 feet tall. And that gives you a sense of this, like an example of this product type. Next slide. This is a picture of the Foothill and Grand condominiums. This project looks similar, but it's different. This is a very flattering view as you go into the entry off of Foothill Boulevard. But this is the same product type as the slide I just showed you. The project on Route 66, which is the 3-story, about 22 units to the acre. I showed you this one is about 16, 17 units to the acre. And the big difference, and this is why I showed this picture, it has a large amenity, that pool area and other walkways and things within this project that reduce the density down. But it is the same unit type as the project I just showed you, just a little less dense. Next slide. And these are the station units. Again, third example of the same type of condominium unit, a 2- and 3-story tuck under parking condominium. And this is right across the street from the post office. Next slide. State density bonuses. There were a variety of questions that came up about bonuses and density bonuses, and that was actually one of the issues with the Route 66 specific plan that the community became concerned about, was that in order to achieve those densities that the specific plan originally had, the city actually incorporated incentives to incentivize particular types of development, particular things to happen. And those were all eliminated from the Route 66 specific plan, so they don't exist anymore. However, the state still provides density bonuses for low-income housing. The city has not seen a project that utilizes state density bonuses, but I wanted to at least briefly explain what they were. So next slide, please. There's really 2 categories of density bonuses. One is a straight up, bonus for a density bonus for providing low-income housing, and it works on a sliding scale depending on how many units you provide within the project and their income category. So if you provide units within the low-income category, if 10% of the units are provided to low-income households, then you get a 20% density bonus. Up to 25% or more units, you get a 50% bonus as part of your project, and that's in the state law. Next slide. The other thing that a developer would be eligible for are concessions for providing low income housing. Concessions meaning reduced development standards, reduced parking requirements, those types of things that would make a project feasible that is otherwise not feasible within the constraints of the code, but in exchange for providing low-income units to those households that qualify and need housing, those concessions are available. Again, these types of incentives are projects have not come to the city. I'm not aware of they may have. I'm sure they're occurring in the San Gabriel Valley. I'm not aware of a lot of projects where low-income housing is being developed and taking advantage of these, but I'm sure, I know in Pasadena, this has happened and other cities around the region. So there might come a day, and it's something from a policy perspective that the city should be thinking about how it's going to address low-income housing within the community. And it's actually something that we've recently talked about too at a council meeting. So it's also timely to think about. Next slide. And this, I'm just going to wrap it up here with a summary slide that, as the council asks questions, I put this at the end really so as the discussion goes along as a tool to refer to, so we don't need to keep going back and forth to all the slides. This has all of the options, including the pre-2017 zoning on Route 66 and the current zoning. And with that, we're requesting that the council review the commission's recommendation and the information presented here and select a housing sites option for us. Maybe at this time I could ask, just to wrap it up, Terry Kent, who it was just he's had his final meeting on the Planning Commission and also was the chairman of the Planning Commission for the last year, to sort of speak to the commission's recommendation. If I could ask Terry to briefly. Thanks, Terry.
Welcome, Mr. Kent.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here tonight. So I wanted to speak on how we, as a planning commission, got to where we got. The mandates come down from the state that Glendora is going to need 2,300 more units, round numbers. I will tell you from my dealings in the building industry and in the Building Industry Association, that's a pretty low number, guys. You don't want to be Riverside that needs 23,000 units. And the 2,300 is a fair number given what's going on out there. It's actually on the lower end from what I can see. All cities are having to deal with this, and how are they dealing with it is there's a lot of different talk on how to deal with it. I will tell you, cities similar to Glendora, the way they dealt with it or are dealing with it is they're looking at what assets they have on the ground, and being the gold line will be here soon. It was, how do we get these 2,300 units, and where would they best be used in our city for economic growth? And my opinion and several planning commissioners' opinion was to try to work around the gold line best we can, but not stick everything there. So that's why the mix across town was kind of put in place here. We looked at it kind of like, what's the target going to be? We can either hit it with a shotgun and blast it all over town and spread multi-story buildings throughout, or we can try to concentrate in an area that's going to be financially beneficial to the city of Glendora. So with all that said, we came to a conclusion of the 45 units. We felt that would help encourage development around the gold line, which would then enhance the downtown Glendora area. It's walkable. There's freeway off-ramps fairly close going down Glendora Avenue to the baseline on-ramps, off-ramps, and as well as Grand Avenue. So that was kind of a few of our thoughts on that. There was some talk of going to 55 and 5 stories. That was tough to swallow. I think what the comments we made, which will be able to be addressed later with the fine tuning of this, is to deal with this architecturally so that we don't end up with a project like we ended up with across from El Amigo there and Winterstitzel, which is a very, very stark, straight up look. Some of our recommendations were to stack it as you go back from the street so that we break up the architecture. So I think these are things we can clean up later, or we're told we can clean up later. At this point, we're just identifying the targets. There was some talk of finding some other targets, one being the school site down on Barranca. The issue that I personally had with that was I didn't see it as any economic driver in Glendora. It was in a residential area. It wasn't walkable to much of anything at all. And it took, which was primarily a single story neighborhood and would put multi-story into it, at least 2 stories. So to me, that was it was a non-starter from an aspect of dealing with this. The state needs a lot of housing, and they've come to this point, as you all know, because it just didn't happen over the last few cycles. So they're playing strong here, and they're gonna ask us to do something. I hear talk of, well, do we go in short and let them come up a little bit higher? Do we come in high and they'll come higher? I'm told by various city officials around the valley that if you come in with a reasonable plan, it'll stick. So with that said, we went for the middle option, the Plan Commission being we, because we think it's a fair program. We think the state will buy off on it, and we won't be going back and forth. Who knows? But they're not going to push up to the 55, I don't believe, from what I hear from other cities and their conversations with the local governments. So to wrap it up, one of our biggest things was, how do we achieve this and also find the economic balance to Glendora that it will enhance what's going on in Glendora? And we felt driving it towards the Gold Line and along the major commercial corridors would help out those corridors, which, as you all know, driving up and down them, they're struggling. So we felt that was the best way to do it. So that's what I have to say. If you guys have any questions, I'm here for you. And best of luck with this.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Mr. Kugel, does Ms. Tam have anything to report at this time, or is she just available for questions when it comes back to council?
Veronica, do you have anything to add right now anything key that I may have missed to kick off the discussion for the council?
Okay, I'm now unmuted. Yeah, I would just be available for answer any questions that you may have, but I think Jeff certainly presented to you some very viable options, and I think your planning commissioners expect that the numbers are high compared to what you're used to seeing, but it's high for everybody. And if you look at even jurisdictions like Acadia, it has a higher number than you. A lot more of the San Gabriel Valley communities have a higher number than you do.
Veronica?
Yes.
Thank you. So at this time, then, I will open public comment before bringing it back to the council. Invite members of the public to address the city council on this topic. And if anyone wishes to speak, please select the raise hand icon in Zoom before the close of public comment, and you will be called on. Have we received anyone wishing to speak? Madam Deputy City Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. At this time, we have no requests via the Zoom meeting and no emails have been received to give public comment.
Okay, we will wait one more second to see if anybody hits that icon. All right, if there is still no raised hands, then I will close the public comment and bring it back to the council for discussion and questions. Councilmember Thompson.
Madam Mayor, thank you. And thank you to Jeff and his team, Terry, Ms. Tam, thank you for being a part of this and helping us to study this very important thing. Jeff, I'm going to start off with some questions that I often hear from public, and I think I know what the answers are, but I want the record to show that we've asked them, and we can make sure that the public knows they've been asked, and if they need to hear what you say, then they can document this. Question one is, so what if we say no to this? People are, I think, tired of mandates, period. So what would happen if we say no and we don't submit a plan?
So, for one, it's number one to start off with, to have a compliant housing element is a requirement of state law. So you'd be in violation of state law without a compliant housing element. Automatically, you're not allowed to apply for housing related grants and funding from the state, which, in the past, I'd say that might not affect us that much because we don't have affordable housing projects that we're building, but we are pursuing funding to support homeless services in the community and getting some of those funds as that becomes a more critical issue. So we would become ineligible for those monies. In addition to that, we get turned over. HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, would report us to the Attorney General, which is something that is, I believe that's, and Veronica, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we do automatically get the Attorney General's notified that we're not in compliance, and so we could face, legal action from the state. So we'd have to decide if we wanted to deal with that issue. The other issue would be, we would also be a target potentially of other, groups that promote housing, and development within the state and the region, advocates for, for development of housing and meeting, URENA. Is that essentially correct, Veronica?
And I can add to that as well, if you wish.
All right. So yeah, Mendel, if you need more, I don't want to over.
No, I'm really just wanting, and I think I knew most of those things, but I often am asked and challenged that, we're tired of saying yes. We're tired of the state saying this is what we have to do. So I'm asking a question because, I think a lot of people are just wanting to know, well, what is the worst case? And I'll take my chances. Personally, I don't want to, but that's why I'm, asking it. So we're here to study this. So that's why I'm asking that question.
Mendel, if I could,
yeah, Gary,
interrupt for just 1 second. I had the same question, so I did a little bit of homework, and I'd be happy to share what I found in the legislation as far as the repercussions if we don't. And I don't know if Jeff or Lana or Valerie may have a different opinion, but I'm reading it directly from the legislation that basically states that if we're out of compliance for a period of 12 months, the state has the ability to take us to court, and we can be fined a minimum of $10,000 a month up to a maximum of $100,000 a month. If we do not comply within 3 months of that, they can actually up those fines by a factor of 3, which would increase the fines to a minimum of $30,000 up to a maximum of $300,000 a month. If after 6 months we're still not in compliance, that can be multiplied by a factor of 6. And it's really not clear if that means 6 times the 3 or 6 times the 1. But let's say it's 6 times the 1, that means a minimum of $60,000 a month and a maximum of $600,000 a month. And after that, if we continue to not comply, the statement says that the court has the right to appoint an agent pursuant to this paragraph with the expertise to manage our housing element. So it's spelled out in there. The fines are quite substantial. And if you just dig your heels in and do nothing, to me, it's very clear that the state has the ability to petition the court to assign somebody to take these decisions out of our hands. So
yeah,
I don't know, Lana or Jeff, is that, I know not looking this up, but does that sound accurate?
Yes, I am familiar with the liquidated damages provisions. I think that's accurate. I also think that the other issue you have to consider, and this may be a part of what Jeff mentioned, is that if any outside of the state taking action, if any developer comes in and challenges an issue with respect to your housing element, and you do not have the sign off from HCD, your housing element can actually be presumed as non-compliance, and you lose a case against third parties as well,
Well,
in addition to the penalties.
yeah, I think you've, done extremely well. And Gary, thank you for that input. And I, like you, are often asked by people just on the, street that they're just tired of this. So I think it's important that we have spelled it out and we've stated this so that people know that this is important, and we don't really have a choice, and we don't want to turn our choice over to the state. And at least I don't want to, and I think I can speak for all of us that we don't want to. So thank you for that. My next question has already been answered. What is the power that the state has? It's been clear about that. Jeff, I've been hearing, I think from Adam and possibly from you, that the census is showing that the population within our city has dropped. Does that affect the numbers that you have showed us?
No, the numbers have been adopted and approved by SCAG, and so those numbers are not subject to any changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I can quickly, Councilman, the total population by the Department of Finance in the City of California is who issues those. We went back and pulled populations statistics from 1970 through the current. Essentially, 2 of the last 3 years, the city of Glendora has actually seen a slight population decrease in those fiscal years. If you go back actually to 2002 to current, that 20-year period from 2002 to 2021, we've seen a net total increase of less than 3% in total population.
Okay. Jeff, what is the effect on parking? We often hear that people are concerned about parking on the street. I was on a phone call today that Adam was challenged about that. And so what, if any, does option A, B, or C affect parking and our own rules?
It doesn't directly affect the parking regulations at all. I know that, when we revised the Route 66 specific plan, one of the concerns about development that the pre-2017 developments, as among the incentives they were eligible for, were reductions in parking and reduced parking standards for mixed use development. So all of those projects that I went through received some type of reduction in parking. Those credits have been, or reductions, incentives have been eliminated from the Route 66 specific plan. So now all development going forward everywhere in the city is subject to the same parking requirements for multifamily development. The only way at this point is to get a reduction in parking would be through a variance or a concession under one of the low income density bonuses that I mentioned a couple.
Thank you. Right. Yeah, I was just going
to. And thank you for saying that, because that was going to be my next one. So you mentioned on the state law regarding the low income parking. So what does that mean in terms of percentage or numbers that the bonus would equate to?
So my interpretation of that, I haven't actually processed a application requesting a density bonus, and maybe Lana could jump in if she knows. So you are eligible for a certain number of concessions based on the number of units you provide. So it's a sliding scale. So an X percentage of units gets you one concession. You can get up to 3. So let's just assume you get a parking concession. I believe my understanding is that you would have to provide a reduction that made the project work, essentially, is what the criteria is. Is that more or less correct, Lana, on the density on a development concession with parking for low income, or are you familiar with that part of the law? Oh, you gotta unmute yourself.
There we go. Yeah, I am. I'm actually pulling up, and this isn't the most recent iteration of laws, but I was actually looking for a density bonus ordinance that we had prepared and what the parking concession was. But essentially, yes, what you're saying is correct. It is definitely a sliding scale, along with the other concessions that a lot of the other concessions that are required to be provided under the density bonus laws.
Well, and my next point was, what is the maximum height? Height has been a topic of heated debate. So what does that mean in terms of how it would equate? I mean, would it go from 40 feet to 60 feet or not that much?
It's a percentage of the maximum height based on that slide. Well,
That's
actually,
right.
for height, so yeah, it doesn't directly speak to height, but I believe, let's say if you got a 10% density bonus, for low income,
Right.
maybe that required additional height. Maybe it doesn't require additional height, but if the developer asks for that as a concession, you would have to provide it.
So just for an example on the parking issue, and again, this is, this may be a bit outdated under the new standards, but the law worked in terms of, to the extent you provided affordable units, for a 0 to 1 bedroom dwelling unit, you could get 1 on-site parking space. For 2 to 3 bedroom dwelling unit, 2 on-site parking spaces. 4 or more bedrooms, 2 1/2 parking space, whatever that means. Right?
Yeah.
And then if the total number of spaces required results in a fractional number, it shall be rounded up to the next whole number. So I guess that is part of answering that last question. Most of the concessions under the density bonus laws, they work in that way.
Okay. Terry, Kent, are you on still?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Terry, thank you for being here, and thank you for the service that you have given for many years, and all of the little league games that you and I have missed by doing what we've signed up to do. So now you're going to get to enjoy your boys. But just curious, and maybe you can unpack why was there no support for option C? I understood option B, and maybe that's the only answer that you'll have. But could you unpack a little bit of what was said about option C and maybe why there wasn't support there?
Well, I guess I would say that we felt that it spread the targets all over town a little bit more than if we could define it to a little bit tighter target. And that was to try, again, for economic reasons. Again, like I say, the school site on Barranca does nothing financially for the city of Glendora. But if we can bring some more citizens near downtown, and they'll walk uptown and have dinner at the eatery or whatever, our downtown can definitely use the support. I mean, I think you all see it. We're probably 10 to 20% vacancy up there. So the more we could support it, I think the better. So that was kind of where we were headed, was just the economics end of it.
Good. Thank you, Terry. The buffer, Jeff. So you're pretty comfortable with the estimated sort of buffers that you've included in the examples?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Madam Mayor, that's all that I have right now. So thank you.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, sir. We have gotten some comments that there was an issue with our raise hand icon. So before I call on any council members, we're going to go back briefly to public comment because we were informed that Erica Landman was having issues with the raise hand, and there may have been others who were having that same problem. So, Ms. Landman, we will call on you right now for your 3 minutes to speak on this topic. Go ahead.
Yes, and don't start it yet. Just to be clear, you actually were correct, Mayor. Originally, the comment is completely limited only to this, given it's a special meeting. Just felt like a Tuesday to me.
That's okay, no worries. So right now, all comments on this subject only. Go ahead, Ms. Landman.
Okay, first, I'm having some internet issues, so I'm gonna make it as quick as possible. I hope I'm not glitchy or anything, but if there's a problem, just let me know. First, I just wanted to know where would all the water be coming from, since there's now a possible drought issue? How would that impact the residents who are already here with new residents possibly coming in? Also, I'm confused as to why you'd want to ponder or consider replacing businesses that brings money into the city with residences. I know both bring money, but businesses keep building more and more profit for the city. So I don't understand why you'd consider possibly placing the businesses near the gold. And what would happen to the businesses in that area, the existing businesses that you would possibly replace with the buildings? And also, let's see, I am totally for the least amount of units per acre, so 30 units per acre, and get the height as low as possible. The other thing I was wondering is you were bringing up the low income. So would the possible homeless shelter be counted in as well into this count? Okay, thank you. All right, I will mute now.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy City Clerk, just in case there is anyone else that is trying to use the raise hand icon and is having any technical issues, at this time, I will invite anyone who is trying to speak to turn your camera on and raise your hand if your raise hand icon is not working, and we'll allow for that opportunity right now.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we do have the ability to allow folks to turn on their cameras and raise your hand if you would like to give public comment at this time. Yeah, no, at this time, we have not received any requests.
Okay, thank you. Then I will close the public comment once again and return it back to council. Councilmember Friedendahl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And as always, thank you, Jeff and staff and Mr. Kent for your service. Input is valuable. A couple of questions. You guys have hit on many of them in the discussion, so that's encouraging. Jeff, in talking about the difference between planned opportunity and production, do we have any idea of the fifth element, 686 homes that are, doors that were expected or we planned for? Do we know how many of those we actually succeeded at?
Yeah, actually, I do. We report that to our progress. Actually, one of the requirements is that you report every year. And as of this past year, since 2013, we have finalized 603 units in the city of Glendora. And which is interesting considering, notwithstanding that, our population has actually gone down and remained relatively stagnant over the last, couple decades. I would add that all of those units are in the market rate category. And so we've not produced any low-income units in the city.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps that decline in population is us old folks turning over and the kids that haven't left home are still in the house. So that's why it's still an opportunity.
That's quite possible.
Yeah. Wolves are barking at the door. Okay, so let's say we did not have that great success. Say we were at 500 and we had the 186 still in the plan but not produced. Does that number harm us anywhere in the next? Does it get accumulated anywhere going forward?
No, the numbers do not roll over to the next cycle. You start, it's a brand new day with the new cycle.
Okay, good answer. Thank you for that. I share a couple of the comments that Erica shared, and looking at the properties in the site map, they seem to logically use up or consume what is the currently economic light industry. So I'm not saying we're pushing out industry, but if those got rezoned and opportunity came along, I'm wondering where are we going to replace that economic gain in the light industry, the jobs, the daytime foot traffic that we don't have enough of now that keeps restaurants from coming and other services that we all pine for.
Well, I think it's important to note that we are not rezoning any commercially zoned property to residential. All of the areas that are shown in the sites inventory, all of them are already zoned to allow residential. Some of those areas can allow either or. They can allow commercial or residential on the property. So in that sense, they're mixed use. But I just want to emphasize that we are not, the market is being given the most freedom of most areas in the city in these zones, and it's being done on purpose to try to attract revitalization and development, whether it be housing or commercial in the area. But having been said, I think the city also has established through policies, the general plan and the Route 66 specific plan, and trying to comply with past housing elements, that it wants housing development and dense housing development in particular parts of that corridor. And so, yes, some commercial as a result of that would be displaced. We're all of the development in the city that occurs. There's nothing that happens in the city that doesn't, demolish old businesses or old buildings or old homes or what have you, and replace them with new development. That we are fully built out. So that is a consequence of having economic activity and investment in the city.
Okay, I just wonder how San Francisco is going to accomplish this, because clearly they're built out and they're up, and they must have a number to attain as well. So, okay. One of my concerns is in looking at the options, there's one I could probably live with, but if we look down the road and we see the state incentives and bonuses, and if those come back for lower income, that means obviously we have to go up somehow to meet that. So we could be looking at something and deciding we'd like 3 or 4 stories, but the only way to give those incentives is now to maybe go to 5 or more. Those are concerns that I see coming. And certainly along with that, the parking concessions are big. We already have a couple of corridors that basically we are aware parking is ugly. Arrow Highway is a dump basically, because along the curb, and we know that, and nobody's defending that. So I appreciate that, and I recognize some of the mandates of how that happens. But I just don't want to see us expand that blight, if you will, to other places.
No, right. And I think the conventional wisdom around development, that it is economic activity, that you don't want to, you want to have an environment that, at least that's been the policies in the past, to encourage investment and growth, because it creates jobs, it directly and indirectly, it brings investment and money into the community. It grows the community and improves its physical condition. And so that's the reason. Those are the reasons to encourage development.
Okay. And certainly you showed us many good examples. And while tonight's discussion is not about design element or setbacks or mandates and things, I think that whatever option we choose as we move forward with the support of the Planning Commission team, as developments come to them, hopefully as a culture, we agree that we don't want to forgive those design elements and start having things that don't fit into the neighborhood. Appreciate that. One last question. Do we know at what point our stories of maximum stories impacts the fire department's ability to service and the apparatus they might have to backfill with to meet these opportunities for service?
That is the question that is completely outside of my area of expertise. Fighting fires.
Let us see if we can find out really quick, Councilman. I think it's probably 6 or 7 stories, but that said, let me find out what type of equipment is in those stations.
Yeah, you can only stand on the ground with a hose and shoot so far, so it's
it's more the evacuation that I always worry about.
So,
good point there too. Okay.
So just so you know, so any development of any consequence that occurs in the city, it doesn't just come through planning or building or engineering or the fire department. It goes through all of those entities, all of those agencies, departments that have jurisdiction, regulatory jurisdiction over the development. And of course, safety and emergency response is a primary level of review for any development. So if any project approached, a level where, the LA County Fire Department or any other agency was unable to respond or meet their standards, then we would know that from the get-go, and it would make the project infeasible. Much the same as water. If our water agency cannot demonstrate that water cannot be provided to a project, that would also be a red light, stop, go no forward, go no further. So just to answer some of those concerns.
Yeah, and there are cities in this state that's the actual issue. Property is easy. It's the water meter you cannot get.
Right.
Understand. And we had a nice discussion recently on inclusionary housing and looking at opportunities. I don't know. If we set a max here, but then we start trying to do the inclusionary, does that change that story to the point where now we're going up even more? So.
No, and I think it's important to note that any of the 3 options is still less density than was, or less units that were available on Route 66 than before 2017. We only are restoring a portion of the density along that corridor. So there was an EIR, an environmental impact report, that did analyze, those impacts for this level of density already.
Okay, thank you very much, team, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Boyer.
Okay. I've got a few questions. Some, Jeff, I've already talked to you about, but, I want to start by confirming something that Terry shared with us, that our RENA numbers that have been assigned to us are actually on the low end for a city of our size. I actually looked up to see what RENA numbers were across the state. And there were 31 cities in California with populations between 50 and 60,000 people. And our RENA numbers, we were number 28 out of 31. So there were only three cities that had numbers lower than ours. All the rest had them dramatically higher. Still doesn't make it right, but that's just a fact that in the whole scheme of things, we're really in pretty good shape. Jeff, a couple of questions for you. If we did absolutely nothing and the open market were to come into Glendora and create new housing based on what our current zoning is right now, and I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball, what do you think the growth would be? How many units do you think it's possible that could be built over the next 9 years?
That's really a crystal ball question. I'm gonna have to put on my crystal ball consultant here. I think that the pace of development, the last, I mentioned we had 600 units in the current cycle, but you also have to remember that there are a handful of big projects. We have Avalon Bay, which was 280 units. We have the La Colina, which isn't fully counted still, which is 121 units. Foothill Grand is 144 units. It's not easy to predict, because we're an infill city, when large properties like that will become available, because everything has something going on it pretty much already. If you're asking me to guess in my crystal ball, and then there's the factors of the economy. Is the timing of the economy good? Are we going to have a good 8 years or so, or are we going to hit another major recession in the next couple of years? If you look historically going back 30 years in terms of the pace of development in the city, I don't have any reason to believe that it would be dramatically different. The types of units that I think are drawn to the market are different than, let's say, 30 years ago, but easily we could see several hundred units, I think, in the next 8 years in the city, if the economy is good, if land becomes available, if there's investors, interested in the city like they have been in the past.
Okay,
That's the best answer I think I can give you.
Appreciate that. Just to put a little context into it as to what would happen without any additional planning. We'd probably be looking at a few hundred, maybe 500 new units.
Sure, and if the city got interested in trying to work with a developer to build a low-income project like the Ellwood Apartments again, possibly you'd do one of those. Yeah. If that's what that would depend upon decisions by the council.
Okay, appreciate it. And then you made a comment and you'd shared with me that the state defines low-income housing as a minimum 30 units per acre.
Correct.
Do you know it's not just based on that, the income level of what is expected to create those if it's 30 units an acre?
Right.
The definition is it includes a cost based on the medium household income or something?
Median
Those
income.
are the definitions of low income, but for purposes of identifying sites, and maybe I'll get Veronica to help me with this answer, is that, Veronica, my understanding that low income sites have to be of a density of at least 30 units to the acre and of a minimum of a certain size. Is there anything else that I'm missing on that?
Yeah, when it comes to these sites, what the state uses is density as a default, as a proxy to feasibility. It's not suggesting that built at market, 30 units to the acre is going to be affordable to low income. What it is saying is at 30 units to the acre, a nonprofit trying to do affordable housing would have a better shot at making the project pencil out with subsidies that they're going to get from the state or federal level, because the amount of per unit subsidies would not be prohibitive for a project. So it's not suggesting at market 30 units to the acre would be affordable to low income, but it's more feasible to make it pencil out. The other kind of restrictions that we have to deal with is that sites that are smaller than half an acre is not considered a feasible site, because the most popular source of funding for nonprofit to get affordable housing built is low-income housing tax credit. an average low-income housing tax credit project is about 40 to 80 units project. Those are the kind of range that is most typical and most successful in getting funding. So the state law basically says if your site is too small, they're not going to be able to build a project that has the economies of scales that can be competitive in a low-income housing tax credit. So that's the size kind of restrictions that Jeff mentioned.
Okay, so my point is that basically us zoning at 30 units per acre does not guarantee that low-income housing that will meet those numbers with what's actually built on those sites.
Correct.
Is that a correct statement? Okay.
That's not your obligation. Your obligation is to make sure that you allow for that potential to happen.
Okay, thank you. You know, one of the things that we saw in California for the first time this year was a reduction in population in California.
Correct.
And, you know, a lot of things can happen between now and 2029. And so one of the issues that I have concerns with, a project like our Avalon project at 55 units an acre is something that once built, it is there forever, or at least for all of our lifetimes. And there's not really any turning back with it. And if things change to the point that we discover that we do not need the housing units that the governor thinks that we need, we then have created, you know, extremely dense neighborhoods, which is a reason I'm not really in favor of the higher densities. Also, personally, I don't like the taller buildings, but you know, that's a different story. You know, I wanted to go back. I'm sorry, my notes. I'm writing notes down here, and I'm coming out of order. But I did want to speak to a couple of things that Erica asked questions on. First off, what we're discussing tonight, unfortunately, we're not taking water into consideration. All that's being considered tonight is us creating an atmosphere in which additional housing could be built in order to meet the growing needs of California. And so the water conversation is going to be an entirely different conversation. The other question you asked about was a potential homeless shelter that we have been having conversations with. I don't believe that that's going to account for any of our numbers, because if the plan that we're moving forward with goes through, we're looking at temporary housing, not permanent housing. So that really won't be part of this equation. Jeff, I had asked you a question. We're in a situation right now that basically ADUs are allowed anywhere in the city of Glendale, anywhere in the state of California on R1 zoning, which for the most part, if the lot can accommodate it, makes virtually any single family home having the potential to having 3 units on it. Is that a correct statement?
Yes.
Okay. And so I asked you about the idea that since we're already in a position of being allowed to have 3 units on, if we were to consider rezoning some of our R1 zoning to R2, that would also put us in a position that may allow 2 or 3 units to an acre, 2 or 3 units on a single family home lot. What impact would that have? And is there anything there that would help us to meet these numbers by considering something like that?
So that's an entirely, it's certainly an interesting strategy, but it is an entirely different strategy than what we've come up with. You know, it's interesting from a discussion perspective because you know, many cities, or at least enough cities to draw the attention of the press, have looked at or have decided to just do away with single family zoning within their communities. You know, we're going to turn all single family zone property into multiple family zone property, or do some sort of variation of that. Many who've decided to do that, to the extent that I've been following them, don't know exactly how they're going to do that. it is what you're talking about, while it, there's a lot of consequences, I could, try to describe what they would be. Many, I have no idea what they would be, because this is not something any other city around us is trying to do. Also, I think it's a much broader discussion with both policymakers like yourselves, as well as the community, that would need to be had, because it would be, I think, as I mentioned, the city for the past 2 decades, more or less, has had this east-west corridor strategy for growth. And that growth has been sort of centered on some principles to revitalize, some declining corridors with higher density housing and development, while preserving to the greatest extent possible existing single-family neighborhoods. So to do what you're talking about would require a complete, I think, redo of zoning, our general plan, and all of our policies, a lot of our policies related to housing. And I think it'd be much too difficult to do that in this housing cycle, because of the time constraints. And it's also just a huge shift in policy.
I didn't say it'd be easy. I just say I have a lot of confidence in you.
Oh, it would be, that would be something else.
Okay, but bottom line, the thought process behind that is, my home, I've got a single family ranch style home on about a 9,000 square foot lot. R2 zoning in the city of Glendora requires 3,000 square feet per unit. So right now, I could add a junior ADU and an ADU onto my property, and there would be 3 properties there. And if it were zoned R2, I could also add 2 additional units, and I would still end up with the same 3 residential units on that same parcel. So,
well, in addition to that, under the ADU law for multifamily property projects, you get 2 ADU units. So it would be the density that the R2 allows plus 2 more ADUs.
Right. So anyways, it's an idea to consider and an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
You had shared that we have 68 ADUs that have either been completed or have been applied for, but you're only projecting 160 during this cycle. If we have 68 already in place, that's almost half of that 160 in year 1 of the cycle. So I'm just sort of curious as to how you came up with a projection of 160.
So, and maybe Veronica can help, because we provided ADU records over, I think a couple of years to demonstrate the pattern of development.
Right.
We have recently seen a big push. And also we were only counting, I believe, finaled units when it comes to calculating. And I think it was, it was 160 ADUs that is the 68 number are previously entitled projects that haven't been built yet. Veronica, you want to add to the ADU estimate?
Yes, we are with, under state law, ADUs can count towards arena credits, but only based on trend, not based on capacity. And so we're specifically required to use the years between 2018 to 2020 or up to current to look at what is your average annual units permitted. And so, depending on what your trend is, you can project that into the future for 8 years. You can like slightly inflate the trend, but the state would then ask you to provide a lot more incentives in order to facilitate that, because you assuming that you may have a spike in the first few years when the law becomes effective, but then there may be some maybe like more like a plateauing over the years. If you're aggressively projecting ADUs, then the state would require that you provide more aggressive incentives to facilitate that.
Okay, so that was my next question is, we've got about 14,000 R1 parcels in the city of Glendora. And so theoretically, that could account for 28,000 new units. Is there something, would there be a benefit to us promoting the building of ADUs, guest house, granny flat, whatever you want to call it, in order to help address some of these numbers, as opposed to rezoning and making some areas higher density than what they currently are?
And I'll let you take that, Veronica. You have any thoughts?
Yeah, again, you don't have the trend to show it. So if you want to substantially, I'll give you an example. We've actually been working on housing elements in the San Diego region, and they're ahead of the SCAG region by 6 months. So certainly we're ahead of the in terms of the process. So we've been negotiating with HCD, and they are very, very adamant that you do not overstate the trend. We would down to, we say maybe we can get 100. No, you can probably do 80. We'll do 90. No, you have to, and they kept coming back and with more requirements in terms of what you're going to incentivize, how you're going to monitor your trend. And if you're not meeting the trend as you suggested, then you will have to revise your housing element and revise your RHNA strategy if you heavily rely on RHNA. So that's the risk you're going to take, and also certainly the fact that you're going to have to substantially step up the incentives to promote that.
Okay, so, and I'm not suggesting anything, just throwing some ideas out there. If we had the ability to waive all local fees for people applying for ADU permits within a certain period, if we had the ability to secure some subsidized financing to help people get low interest financing on additional ADUs, those types of incentives, if we could produce something like that, do you believe that there'd be a possibility of us increasing that number?
Yes, but still not significantly. I think the waiving of fees would give you a little bit more credit, but trying to pursue funding that there's no guarantee that you'll get it is not going to necessarily help you boost the trend too much. But I would say that still, based on the difficult negotiation that we had to do for some of the clients who tried that route, one, definitely it's not going, you cannot say that you're going to double. They've not allowed anybody to double the trend. Two, and you're going to have to put in an annual or biannual monitoring, and if you're not meeting the trend, you have to revise your RHNA strategy. So that would, to some extent, depending on how much of a buffer you have in your site inventory, if your ADUs are not coming in as you projected, and your buffer is not enough to compensate for the lack of trend, then that would means you're going to have to revise and amend your housing element.
Okay, I appreciate it. So if let's say we use the number 160 to report this, and we find ourselves a few years from now that the popularity of ADUs in the city of Glendora goes through the roof, and we're looking and we have 300 or 400 or 500 possible ADUs coming on board, is there the ability to reallocate some of the zoning at that time? Is that something that can our plan be addressed again?
I think that at that time there are two things to consider. One is that if you're confident that you are going to have enough remaining capacity for your remaining RENA, even though nobody may be proposing to build, but you still have to keep the capacity. I think the most difficult piece of the one thing that we need to check is the SB 330, Jeff, the no net loss based on
Right.
SB 330, that you cannot downzone properties that compared to your 2018 capacity. I think, but that law sunsets in 2025 or 2026.
Yeah, okay, appreciate it. And then last question for Jeff. If you'd mentioned if we were to consider option C, there might be a need to find some additional locations. Do you have any specific locations in mind? And if you do, is it possible to share those with us tonight? Or is it something that you would have to dig into and come back to us with ideas later?
So I have come up with sites. You know, I guess I'm happy to, if I kind of wanted to hold them back until if the council was going to choose option C, but I guess if you want me to list them, I can. But essentially what they are, you know, there are vacant sites or underutilized sites that are within single family neighborhoods. One's a school site, but most of the sites I found are R1, R2, or estate zoned properties that are, for example, you know, the Masonic Lodge property on Valley Center, the horse property at the end of Bennett, the stables. There's a 3-acre vacant site off of Compromise Line. There's the property on Bonnie Cove. Those are all sites that are currently zoned residential, for example, but they're not on our sites inventory list. So when a developer comes to town, or what we're telling this, those are not listed as priority sites. And so we wouldn't be rezoning anything, but you'd be going in and identifying sites like that for redevelopment.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's all I have for right now. Looking forward to hearing what everybody else has. Thank you, Karen.
Councilmember Allowas.
Thank you, Mayor. And Jeff, you must feel like a whipsaw back and forth with all of our questions off to the side leading up to this, anticipation of what we're going to ask you to do, and you got a short amount of time to do it. I'm sure it's not an enviable position, because you know we always come up with quirky things, particularly Gary. But that's all right.
You know,
just giving you bad time, Gary.
I've been doing this a long time. It's like I'm just like a fish swimming in water by this time. So
I see those gills coming through. You know, my colleagues have asked a lot of great questions, and I want to hone in on something. You know, back in the last surveys that we had, the True North surveys, it said that, you know, roughly 42% of the folks say that we don't listen to them out in the residence. And with some of the opening questions that Mendel had, it shows that we do listen. And this is really important, because as Gary said, that we're going to be living with this well past we're on council. And it's going to be a long-lived decision that we make here tonight and moving forward. And we have to be very diligent in our thought process, as well as what our residents want and what they don't want. You know, they were very, very clear that in all the surveys we've had over the last three cycles, it says, you know, shows that our residents continually want limited growth and development. So we're put into a box between the residents, which are our bosses, and what the state wants and what they're mandating us to do. And so we have to be very careful in our process moving forward. There's several questions that are brought up, and I kind of wanted to extend on that. And Jeff, you and I had this conversation, but we didn't get down to the answer. What percentage of our land is zoned residential, and a percentage of residential versus commercial industrial? Because it was brought up by Gary, which is rightly so, is that, you know, we're at the bottom of the list as far as the number of units that we have to zone for. But then again, we're already kind of a bedroom community as it is. We have very little commercial and industrial compared to other cities. So what is that number?
Yeah, and thanks. I was able to, after we talked, I pulled that table out of the general plan land use element. So it hasn't changed that much. So this is 2005, you know, information. So the percentage of land in the city that's zoned residential, that in the entire city, is almost 42% of the land. And I'll also add that the city boundaries include a lot of hillsides. So 37% of the land in the city is open space. So between the 42%-ish land of the city that's residential and the 37% that's open space, about almost 80% of the land in the city. This includes streets and public rights of way too. So is about 80% of the land in the city is either residential or open space. Only 2.25% of the city's land is zoned commercial or industrial.
So if you're playing Sim City, you probably wouldn't do a good job at the bank, would you?
Well, I think that, in fairness, I mean, Glendora is part of a larger, group of cities, and we fit into a sub-region of a huge metropolitan region. So our role, our destiny, which was laid by, previous councils, has been to make, and a lot of it's dictated by the market and where we're located, and our place within the region is that we're primarily a bedroom community, and to the extent we have business in industry, for the most part in 2021, it provides goods and services to the residents who live here.
So I want to flip over to a comment that was made about the possible school site on Barranca, and Adam, perhaps you can answer this one for us. During the pandemic, we actually did fairly well because we didn't rely on tourism. We didn't rely a lot on commercial. A lot of our residents bought online, and the property tax basis kind of helped carry us through the day. So if we did add something hypothetically at the Barranca school over there, the old adult school, that would just add to our base of property tax, and that would be actually a plus for us, would it not?
I wish I could tell you and look in my crystal ball and tell you that is indeed the case. I'd just like to echo the comments of the Planning Commission at that time, which felt without a firm commitment from the school district, they felt that was not the right path to go at that time. Speaking of commercial versus residential, I think one of the things that really carried us through the pandemic was our main shopping center, which was controversial at its time, right? With the development of the Home Depot. Glendorans are fortunate for the most part, where many individuals have disposable income, and instead of being able to go on vacation, they did home improvements. And what we've seen from our sales tax reports here is that the spending, while went down, did not go down the same as other communities. And being able to do things like parklets allowed our restaurants to continue to do well, which allowed other people to shop. And then car sales remained relatively strong, which was the big standpoint, which we didn't project at all. Although being a heavily property tax city, we definitely did pretty well with the turnover of homes.
So that's still, you're kind of out to lunch then with what that answer might be for that property, because that can add quite a few units in that property, correct?
Yeah, I think the Planning Commission's opinion, it'd be interesting, and I know Terry's still on the call if you hear about that, but it definitely is, we have a couple sites potentially where that's the case. We'd just like to add on this conversation about development. I know we're talking a lot about a commercial, but it's important to know that people drive the commercial development for the most part. So the more people you have, the more inevitably a commercial and mixed use you have as well.
But we also have to be careful not to remove commercial spaces for daytime traffic for restaurants.
The number one housing development sites in Los Angeles County are underperforming the commercial centers. It's been that case for several years now.
So I wanted to extend on a question that Gary hit on about the 30 units per acre and the size of the units. Is there a minimum size? I don't think that question got answered. Is there a minimum size for a unit? And if we said 30 units per acre and they were to, and I'm going to piggyback on the other conversation we had on the bonus tolerances of 20% and 50% respectively, that will add to bracket creep. Each option would jump up a bracket, if you will, if they were to get their 25% bonus, which will aid a 50% increase in density. So what's the size, the minimum size a unit can be?
So in our specific plan corridors, there are no minimum sizes for units.
Okay, so we can build closets with a bathroom?
I mean, if
Well, it has to be.
I don't know if the market would provide that, but for example, I mean, in Avalon Bay, there are between 600 and 700 square foot units. Those are typical 1-bedroom units in an apartment building. Most of the time, the market, condos range anywhere from 1,200 to over 2,000 square feet sometimes.
So we have a plethora of all kinds of housing bills. I think we have 240 some odd housing bills. Gary can correct me on that. That's up there. We have no idea which ones are going to get passed, but it looks like a ton of them will get passed. One of them is AB 1401, which will eliminate parking period for development. And I believe it's, Adam, I think it's through its third hearing, I think it is right now, before it goes to the floor.
Yeah, AB 1401 is surrounding high transit corridors, I believe is the bill that you're referring to.
Within a half a mile walking distance.
Right.
It does eliminate all for those areas and those high transit corridors. Just for anyone who's listening wants to know, the Gold Line would qualify as a high transit corridor, as would potential bus stops with certain frequencies. It is a portion of a bill that came through last time and was made a 2-year bill and then killed. Undetermined amount of support, but lots of cities have issued letters of opposition at this point. And that's just out of committee, I might add, in 1401, but not a full Assembly or Senate vote that I think of at this time, but it is making its way through the process.
But we do know we have a whole bunch of bills out there that we have no idea which is going to get passed. We're still trying to choke down what was done in the last cycle.
I think to that point, Councilman, the league through its housing committee, has asked the state to please let us get through this process before they pass any new bills. And I think we can all agree that that's probably not going to happen. And I wish I had the crystal ball we used earlier to determine which one of those bills would go through, because it sure would make this process a lot easier.
But it's a high probability we're going to have more housing bills to deal with.
I would venture to say it's a certainty we'll have more housing bills to deal with. It's just the severity of those bills and the number.
Right. So which leads me back to the 10% and 25% bonuses. What's the likelihood or probability that that's going to hit us? Because that will definitely bracket up all of your options by one bracket. In fact, increase the option A to another bracket, if that were to happen.
So, I mean, based on historically, the probability that a developer would come to us to take advantage of one of those types of bonuses is low, like in the very low range. Since low-income housing has been a development option and at times projects that the city has pursued, and yet there is still only one low-income development that's for families in the city, and so only 87 units. And I think as a practical matter, it takes the city's participation to do that. So either with land or facilitating financing. So I think the probability in the next 8 years is low. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It's just my assessment of past history on it.
I had a project outside of the city that I had to do, and I went through and I read ad nauseum all the different bills that were in front of us, 200 and some odd bills, and a lot of them are all by right if they pass, and that's disturbing. And what we decide today, we might decide, and then we're going to have these other housing bills going to come online, and that will exasperate some of the issues that we're going through. I've got a question, actually. It's my last question for you. Is on you showed the picture of the Forestdale, and that has off-site parking as well, does it not? Across the street, it has a little parking lot there that's part of the contract, so it's not all contained on site.
That may be true. I don't know. I do know that project was developed at a time when there were parking reductions granted for mixed use, and that project did take advantage of those reductions. I don't know, what they're currently doing to manage, let's say too much parking, and I can see that that's possible, but I don't know that that's true.
Okay. I did have one other question, and we had talked about this briefly. the design elements. So you're bringing back some of the ones that were under the 2017 before we changed it. Step back in heights at different second and third levels. Is that going to be in play as we move forward?
We haven't even talked about that. That was not, I mean, there are design guidelines within the Route 66 specific plan right now that encourage that type of, architectural variety in the different districts. But what we're doing tonight, or the housing element, would not commit the city to changing anything other than the density in the areas that I've described.
So as it is right now, do we have a step back in those areas for the second and third stories?
Not a mandate. It's not like a code step back. No, it's a design guideline. So it'd have to be worked through the design review process.
So basically, besides the setbacks, which are there, because we changed that, we can have something that's on the motif, which across from the Dorina Central, we could have a building with holes in it for windows.
With what for windows?
I'm being facetious. We can build another, they can still be flat sided if they wanted. In theory, you're saying in theory, could it happen? I suppose that's possible. But as a practical matter, I don't see how that would ever happen. Is that something we're going to address between now and October 21st?
No.
But Councilman, I think this raises a good point. Jeff, do you mind walking through the process once you have a final housing element approved by the state? Right.
So after we go through this process, we have 3 years to do the rezoning. So through that process, I'm imagining that if, in addition to any changes in the density and height, that if the council or through the commission review of the process that, if the commission or council want to make more changes to the Route 66 specific plan or the Earl Highway specific plan or any other place where housing gets built in the city, there would certainly be opportunities to do that.
So we had talked this afternoon, you sent a late email about the assisted living, and kudos to you and your team for making that happen. That's a great job. It's been in the works for such a long time. So thank you very much. I'm sure it's going to be a great addition to the city. You mentioned that assisted living doors don't count, or they haven't counted towards our numbers. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, maybe this is another one. Maybe Veronica can talk about how HCD treats institutional uses like college dorms, assisted living, and even homeless shelters.
Well, essentially, RENA only looks at housing units, and housing units, according to the California building code definition, has to have cooking and plumbing facilities. And so they're not considered group quarters. You would not be able to count group quarters or college dorms as housing units against RENA. However, a lot of the college students' housing and faculty or staff housing are actually organized or designed as housing units, apartments, or condos, townhomes. As long as they meet the definition of housing units, you get to count them, even though they're on campus or off campus. The only difficulty sometimes, because a lot of times local jurisdictions do not have land use control over colleges and universities. So you have to rely on the college or campus master plan to see what they're planning on and what they can count it.
Veronica, how about assisted living for seniors?
Assisted living for senior, if it's the memory care, if it's the nursing care component, no, you don't get to count it because it's group quarters and it's number of beds. But a lot of the assisted living facilities have independent living units. And so you could count the independent living units. The trick is to make sure that when you permit it as a local jurisdiction, that you permit that component of the assisted living development as housing units.
Jeff, is it too late to do that?
Well, the way they've designed this project, they're assisted living and sort of memory care units. And so they don't have those fully independent facilities, cooking facilities in the project. That's not how they've they've designed it. And I think it is too late to change that because, you know, one of the benefits that they get from the project is, you know, you don't have to have as much parking if you're having more institutional level care being provided in the project. So that's not the type of project. They're not building sort of an independent senior apartment living type of a unit, which we could count. They're building, you know, an institutional level where care is provided, meals are provided, other services are provided, and by and large, the people who live there don't, you know, live and drive and function without that level of care.
But if we were to choose option C, there's your buffer right there, 180 units. So that's my last question, promise. I know we got other questions coming up, and I need to get Mendel to bed soon. So that's my last one. Thank you, Mayor.
Jeff and Veronica, and thank you, Terry. I agree with comments that Terry had shared earlier. You know, option B is that Goldilocks option, and I don't know if it's on everyone's screen, but it almost, the way, Jeff, that you have put it in the PowerPoint has that golden hue to it. So perfect for the Goldilocks approach. But a couple of the things that were brought up, Forestdale, there was conversation about parking across the street, but that was never part of the approval process. If they reached any agreement like that, it was done separately. While the Motif building may not be everyone's aesthetic, if you've toured that development, it's very nice inside. And it was because of the Motif that we were able to get the developers to look at the Sprout Shopping Center. They were looking for additional housing in that corridor and of a certain genre and type, bringing certain folks to their stores at Sprout and the other places. So it was one of those things that went hand in hand. And I think that was mentioned earlier, that the residential can get some of these other projects into town because it shows the developers what we're doing. So I appreciated that as the Planning Commission looked at this and weighed the various options, that they landed on option B and were very strategic and intentional about, about that, looking at the future and eliminating some of those properties that they felt were not a good fit because of what citizens have said. I think they were trying to listen to citizens and not put high density on specifically some of those school properties, such as off of Barranca. So I think that their recommendation to us was a good one. I don't know if council is ready to make a motion now, or if you need this to come back to another council meeting to have more conversation. But I think that Jeff and his team and the Planning Commission have done a good job at weighing these options and landing someplace that accomplishes on our terms what the state is asking for, rather than somebody telling us what to do, and tries to meet the needs of current and future residents by providing housing in these areas that would also have access to transportation and other things that the residents would need.
I move that we approve option C, or give direction to approve option C, with staff coming back with the buffer requirements that that we need in addition.
Okay, I'll second that.
Okay, so thank you. So that is a motion to, I don't know that we can approve. Can we actually do that, or advise to return back with an option B, given the comments that were made earlier in the meeting?
No option B. It's option C.
Sorry, option C.
Option C.
And albeit it would, we'd have to look to Jeff for the time frame to come back.
Right. Well, I'd ask if the council doesn't go with option C, you know, we really need to get started on completing the draft housing element. So we give this. So can we bring the draft housing element back with the amended sites inventory?
Agreed. Agreed. Gary, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that, but we still have to take a vote on it.
Yes.
Yes. We have a
Yes.
motion and a second for option C with some amendments. Ilya, are you clear on
Yes.
the proposed? Okay.
Yes, amendments to the site inventory as noted during the discussions.
Thank you.
So that is a motion by Councilmember Alawas, a second by, I believe it was Councilmember Thompson. Mayor Pro Tem, apologies, Mayor Pro Tem Boyer. I'm going to take a vote. Councilmember Alawas?
Yeah, Mendel has a question.
Oh, sorry.
He's muted.
You should be able to unmute.
Unmute, okay.
There we go.
Jeff, could you, just to refresh, I mean, we've been talking about this for a couple hours, so could you go back and I'm not trying to position anything, but as I recall, there was a comment that you made on option C that there was a concern. Could you just, and I don't want to be out of order. I mean, I'm ready to vote, but I just wanted to ask if there was a chance to get a clarifying statement.
So the concern, I think here's here's the concern with option C. We are going to go to the state, and I think as Veronica Tam has indicated, they've been very tough on cities in San Diego County who are ahead of us. And one of the things that they scrutinize are the site's inventory itself. If they have reason to believe, based on what we show them, that sites would not be able to be, developed within the time period or are not feasible for some reason, they could put it back to us to find more sites. And with option C, we've maxed out, I think, finding every little nook and cranny that we can without possibly looking at rezoning commercial sites.
Okay.
And so that would be, what everything we're doing up to this point doesn't change any commercial to residential. And A or B give us more leeway and flexibility in the event that we're challenged on. And I don't know that will happen, but that's a potential risk with option C.
Okay.
But option C is still viable, though. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mendel, but option C is still viable.
As presented, that's absolutely correct. It's just
Your perspective.
The only other question that I had is if they kick it back, then we still have a chance to adjust, right? I mean, it's not just a kickback and we failed.
Oh, right. No, you have to adjust and you have to present something that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt that, but I just needed some further.
That's okay. You're entitled.
Okay.
I'm ready to vote.
Are we ready to vote? Okay, so just to reiterate, then it is to bring the housing element back with an amendment to the site inventories. And that was a motion by Councilmember Alawas, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Boyer. Councilmember Alawas?
Yes.
Councilmember Thompson?
Yes.
Councilmember Friedendahl?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Boyer?
Yes.
And Mayor Davis?
No.
And that passes 4-1-0. Thank you.
And for option C, just to be clear, with the amendments as you stated.
And my no vote reflects that what Mr. Kugel was just referring to was the rezoning of commercial and some of those other options that are part of C that are not part of B. So just to clarify. All right, that is all that is on our agenda tonight. Mr. Raymond or Lana, do you have anything that you need to add before we adjourn this meeting?
I do not. I think the direction that we have is quite clear at this point.
Adam?
Madam Mayor, could I just ask Jeff one additional question?
Sure.
So Jeff, what's our time frame now? I mean, to submit, and then you said the state would have like what, 60 days? So when should we be hearing back?
Well, hopefully, and I'll think Veronica and I will need to get together and talk, soon. I believe they're within a few weeks of giving us a draft with this information. And so I hope we could get it presented to the council, the draft, in July, and then send it off to the state, July, August, have comments back from the state no later than early September. And then have a few weeks, hopefully more than a few weeks to address those comments and get a final version in front of the council before October 21st.
Thank you.
Jeff, thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Terry. And Adam, no further comments?
None.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right, thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.